Right, so I'm going to create a variable, okay, called difference. It's going to be a double value because these value amounts can be 450, 550, so it's going to be a double value. I'm going to call it difference. And over here, right, when I'm displaying the quarters, the individual values, sales for the quarters, right, in the format string, let's also, after displaying this value, right, let's just put a space here and put parentheses here, and then a value is going to fill this, which is going to be the difference, right? Since it's a double, we need to basically create a placeholder for a floating point value. So f, percentage f. Since it's a monetary amount, let's round it to 2 decimal places, and let's put commas where necessary and put a $sign in front of it. So this is another placeholder, which means I need to also specify another argument to fill it. So this is the first argument for this placeholder. Second argument for this placeholder. Now I have a third placeholder here. I need a third argument for it. I'm going to break the line somewhere around here after this comma, and then I'm going to specify the last value for this value here, which is basically the difference I have up here, right? Now difference, well, it's not initialized, so we're going to, if I compile this, we're going to have a problem. But let's set it equal to 0, right? Let's set it equal to 0 so that it just displays 0 in parentheses around everything. So let's compile this, run it, and then let's see what happens. Okay, so we can see that well, you know what? I don't want to confuse dollar amount, so I'm going to remove the dollar around it, around the difference. I just want to see how many, in terms of numbers, how many dollars it went up or down. And so right around here, I'm going to remove the $sign, right? Just so it's a bit clear. All right. Okay, so this is good. Now we need to basically make sure it works in terms of proper numbers. All right, so we don't want to do anything for the first index, okay, the first quarter of each division. We don't want to do anything for, that's what the program said. And so we know that the first quarter of each division has a quarter index of 0, right? And so quarter index is here. Where is it? So division index, quarter index is here. Let's see how I'm going to do this. All right. Okay, so we know that quarter index is keeping track of the individual quarter, the individual quarters, right, of each division. And so we don't want anything to happen when the quarter index is 0, right? But we want to calculate the difference between the current quarter and the previous quarter when the quarter index is 1 or above, right? And so before we display the difference, initially it's 0. Before we display it, we want to check with an if statement to see that if the difference, not if the difference, if the quarter index is greater than or equal to 1, then we want to calculate the difference, right? We don't want anything 0. We don't want any index of 0. Anything that's greater than or equal to 1, in any quarter index that's greater than or equal to 1, that's where we want to calculate the difference, right? Because if we start with this, which has an index of 0 each, we wouldn't have anything to compare with. We want to start from anything that has an index of 1 or above, okay? All right, so if the quarter index is greater than or equal to 1, right, then let's calculate the difference. The difference is going to be equal to company info, right? We are dealing with, let's see. Yeah, company info, we are dealing with, in that particular slot, that particular position, we are dealing with that particular division index and that particular quarter index. But we want to subtract its previous value. So company info, the particular division index. I hope I'm doing this right. I think so. And then since we are basically subtracting since we are basically subtracting the previous value from the current value, from the current quarter. So if we have an index of 1, for example, we are dealing with the if we know we are dealing with the second quarter, right? And so if you're dealing with the second quarter, then we have to subtract the first quarter from it to know what's the difference between 5 and 4, basically a jump from 4 to 5. And so we have to make sure we are subtracting from the previous quarter, and the previous quarter is going to have an index 1 less than the current quarter, so we're subtracting 1 from quarter index, right? That's how we calculate the difference. Compile this. Oops, we have an error here. It says what? It cannot find symbol variable quarter index. Quarter index. How did I name the quarter index? If quarter index. Oh, sorry. So this has to go. This is correct, but this whole thing has to go because it doesn't know what quarter index is yet, right? This has to go in the loop before it displays. Okay, in the quarter, basically in the loop that goes through all the quarters before it displays the quarter. So I'm going to paste it here and then indent it well. Okay, yeah. So now it knows what quarter index is. All right, so let's compile this. All right, run this. Let's see what happens. So let's type in some random values. Okay, so let's see if it's correct. Oops. Okay. So it's kind of working, but we did something wrong here. Let's fix it. So each time we go to a division, we want to reset quarter index. We want to reset the difference to 0. So this is basically calculating the difference, for these. But then each time we go to another division, we want to set the difference to 0 so that it calculates the difference for the quarters in that particular division. So that's why this is set to -5. It's using the previous value. We have to set it to 0. So over here, once we are done calculating the difference, we want to set difference to 0 when we start iterating another division, right? So let's over here declare difference, but then we set difference to 0 when we start a division. We calculate the difference for the quarters in that division, and when we start another division, we set difference to 0 so that we calculated a difference for that part. So that we calculate the difference for the quarters in that particular division, right? Compile this, run it, let's see if it works. So pull this up a little bit. Okay, so we have zeros for the first quarter, which is good. So the difference is 0, 0, right? So nothing is displayed. Now we can write code so that this is not even displayed, but let's leave it at 0 for now. So over here, jump from 5 to 6. That means a $1 jump, right? So that's correct. That's a difference. And over here, jump from $6 to $7. That's another $1 jump. That's good. So 3. That's the first quarter where we have nothing to compare it. So the difference is 0. It jumped from $3 to $6. So that's a $3 jump, right? And then it dropped from $6 to $5, and that's a -1, right? A -$1 drop. And so we can see the difference is working. And so that's what I understand by this question here. Each division's increase or decrease from the previous quarter, right? This will not be displayed for the first quarter, so that's why we have zeros here. Now we can write code to not display this at all. So that shouldn't be too hard. So let's just leave it at 0 for now. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. Now it says the total sales for the quarter. Now for this one, I'm not. I think what it wants for us to, for example, when we take quarter 1 for all divisions. But now the question over here said that the program should display the following data for each quarter, right? So if it says over here the total sales for the quarter, then we take quarter 1, the total sales for all of it. Quarter 2, total sales for all of it. So over here will be 8, right? 5 plus 3, 6 plus 6 will be 12, 7 plus 5 will be 12. That's going to be the total sales, right? And so let's do that. Since we have a structure for going through the loop, it's fine. That helps us a lot. So let's create another method that's going to basically calculate the total sales for each quarter, right? So before our main, let's create another method, public static void. Oh, is this going to be void? Total sales for each quarter. Well, for now, let's just keep it as void, and then we'll change it regardless. We change it if we need to. So public static void. Let's call this method calculate. Says total sales for the quarter, right? So calculate quarterly sales. Calculate totally quarterly. That's a totally quarterly. Total quarterly sales, right? Is it too long? It's fine. Public static void calculate total quarterly sales. All right, so we know this method is going to need an array. So I'm going to create a parameter for a two-dimensional double array called company info. Okay, same thing as the other ones. And then we are going to go through the array, but this time around we are going to go through the array column by column, right? So basically we're going to go through the array. So let's see if I have the output here to show you, because if we're going to calculate the columns, the total sales for each quarter, then we are not going through the array this way. Okay, we are not going through it this way. We are going through it this way, and then we come that way. Okay, and then this way, and then this way. So we're going through our array this way, this way, this way, basically vertically. And so that means that we start from over here, right, in the first column, and then we go down before we start from the second column, and then we go through all the rows. When we start from the third column, we go through rows. This time around, it's going to be the opposite of what we're doing, what we've been doing, which is basically start from the first row, go through all the columns, move to the second row, go through all the columns. This time around, we're starting from the first column, going down through all of it, and then we'll move on to the second column, going down through all of it. So we're going to structure this loop a bit differently. It's basically going to be the other one. It's basically going to be the same thing flipped. So let's just make a copy of it. Right. Let's make a copy of it. Calculate totally quarter sales. Total. I keep on saying totally quarter sales. Calculate total quarter sales. Quarterly sales, I guess. I don't know. Quarterly sales. All right. Pasting this. Remove what's in the middle because that's going to change. Now let's change the structure. We are starting from the quarter, right? And then the division is what we're going to go through. So we're starting from first quarter 1, and then we're going down, okay, through all the quarters before we move on to the second quarter. Going down, okay, this way before we move on to the second quarter, and so on and so forth. So we're starting from the quarter. So for int quarter index is equal to 0, as long as the quarter index is less than, not the company info.length, because we know the company info.length will give us the number of rows, right? We want the number of quarters, and we remember we said that if we take any row, assuming the first row's length, we accessing the number of quarters. So we want the index to be less than the number of quarters, so that we have a valid index. Do what's in the loop, and before you come back up to check to see if quarter index is less than the company info, the first row's length, or basically the number of quarters in each division, or in any division, which is going to be 4 for all of them, assuming the user types in 4 for number of quarters here. Then we do what's in the loop, and we add 1 to quarter index. Basically the same idea as the loops we've been using, the nested loops we've been using, but flipped. And then we start with the first column, go through all the rows, which is all the divisions now. So for int division index is equal to 0, as long as the division index is less than the, now we want the number of divisions, and we know when we use a company info dot length, not by picking a row and seeing how many columns there are. We want now the number of divisions, number of rows, and to get the number of rows and number of divisions, we can use the name of the array's length property, and that will give us the number of rows. So we're checking to make sure the division index is less than the number of divisions, so basically number of rows of that array. And we do what's in the loop, and before we come back up to check to see if the division index is less than the company info's length, let's add 1 to division index. So division index plus plus. All right, so now we have a mechanism for going through the array this way, okay, instead of horizontally. Okay, and so each time we do that, we need a variable, right, to keep track of basically the sum. We're going to accumulate these values, right? So let's create a variable. I'm going to call it total. It's going to be first of all, it's going to be a double value. I'm going to call it total quarterly sales. And that's just going to keep the sum of all the values in each quarter. Okay. It could be so for all the values for one particular quarter. So quarter one, all the values, okay, in all the divisions. All right, so let's set that to 0 because we're going to accumulate it, right? Before we start accumulating, we want it to be 0. And so over here, we want to add to the total quarterly sales, right? So total quarterly sales. But then we know we are dealing with the particular index, particular division index and quarter index. And so we can just say division index, sorry. Typing is not good. Division index and then quarter index. And what did I do? I'm sorry. I think I messed it up. I meant to say total quarterly sales, right, is going to be equal to, hold on one second. We're going to add, okay, we are adding to, because each time we are using this nested loop, we are going through the array this way. And so we are starting from this value, moving to this value, okay, and then we'll move to this value, move to this value, and so on and so forth. So each time we want to add to quarterly sales, right? And quarterly sales so quarterly sales is going to be equal to what's already stored in, total quarterly sales, which starts at 0, is going to be equal to what's already stored in total quarterly sales plus company info and then the particular index, the particular division, and then the particular quarter, right? We are accessing the value over there. I need my semicolon here. So we are adding a particular value of that particular slot. So we start from this value 5 and we add it to quarterly sales index. Total quarterly sales, right? This variable is going to hold, for example, 5. Then it moves to 3 and it adds 3 to what's already stored in total quarterly sales, which is 5. It becomes 8, right? So total quarterly sales is equal to I keep on saying totally quarterly sales. I don't know why. All right, so let me just calm down. All right, so total quarterly sales is equal to total quarterly sales plus the value stored in the particular slot of the array that we are in this particular loop. Now, this can be written in a shortcut version, right? Same thing. So we can write it this way. Totally quarterly sales. Ah, my goodness. I keep on saying that. Total quarterly sales plus equals, right, the value in this particular slot of the array. So it's like we're adding this value, okay, to total quarterly sales. Or total quarterly sales is increasing by this value. And so by the time we're done with all the quarters by a particular division, okay, so we start with one quarter, we go through all the divisions, we will have, so for example, if we are done with all the quarters in one division here, we know that's our total for that particular quarter, so we can actually print it. But I want us to store it in an array. Okay, I want us to have an array of 4 elements, and each element is going to be the total for each quarter. We're going to be 4 quarters. So the array, let's create an array that's going to have 4 slots, and each slot is going to be the total sales for each quarter. And so for that array, it's going to be a one-dimensional array, right? One-dimensional array, I'm going to call it total. Over here, I saved it as total quarterly sales, so I'm trying to give it a name here. Total total sales, I guess total sales array, right? I guess let's just name it total sales array for now. Right, total quarterly sales array. total quarterly sales array, right? And let's set it. Let's give it a size. We need to give it a size. It's going to be equal to a new double one-dimensional array. Now we need to specify a size for it. Now, if it's going to store 4 slots, think about it. It's going to store. So over here, I know we have 3 quarters, right? But ultimately, we'll have 6 divisions and 4 quarters. So if you have an array of, let's say, 6 divisions, so if we want, we can also deal with this. But I want us to just get used to the 6 and 4 because that's what's in the question. And so if we want to know how many quarters there are, right? So let's say there are 6 divisions, 4 quarters. Then there'll be 4 quarters, right? But we can't just hard code it in here. If we hard code it in here, and whoever calls this method provides an array with different divisions and a different number of divisions and quarters, then we'll have a problem here. So we need a way to basically dynamically know the number of quarters, right? And what we can do is, okay, so we see over here, right? We created a variable for a number of quarters. We can pass it in. Anytime we call this method, we can pass this value in. And so let's create a parameter. Let's say this method is going to accept, first of all, an array, and then second of all, a value for a number of quarters, right? Number of quarters is going to be an integer. So integer or int number of quarters. And whenever we are calling this calculate total quarterly sales, we're going to pass in a number of quarters, which we will have here. Okay. All right. So total quarterly sales, we will have. So anytime we start with one particular quarter, we go through all the divisions for that particular quarter. We calculate the total sales, and then we store the result, right, in the first slot, okay, or in the right slot of total quarterly sales, right? And so total quarterly sales, we need an index also to refer to that. But when you think about it, we have a 2-dimensional array here. We have a variable that's keeping track of our quarter index. And so we can use that to refer to our total quarterly sales array as well. Because we are starting from the first quarter, calculating the total sales for that quarter. We still have the index for it. And so we can use the index to store the total sales for that particular quarter in total quarterly sales. So if we are dealing with the first quarter here, for example, and so once we are done calculating the total, we can use the same index to also store the total of that quarter in total quarterly sales. And so anytime we're done calculating the total for that particular quarter, let's use the index, the quarter index, to store the total quarterly sales for that particular quarter. And so once we're done calculating the total sales for that particular quarter, let's use the index, quarter index, and then use that to store the total sales in the total sales. Sorry, let's use that to. So where am I? What did I define the double array? Yeah, right here. This double array actually shouldn't be in the loop. Let's define it outside the 2 nested loops. Okay. Let's define it outside the two nested loops. We don't want any time we iterate, okay, to define a total quarterly sales array. Otherwise, we're going to lose the values in there. We may even get an error. And then so I also mentioned that we need a number of quarters, right? And so I know this is a bit maybe a bit confused, or maybe it's a bit disorganized, but I hope you're following, right? So over here we said we need a number of quarters to know basically the length of this array. And the length of the array is going to basically be the number of quarters, because when you think about it, we are storing the total sales for each quarter in that array. And so if we are using this in main, if we are using these values to create the 2-dimensional array, we're going to have a variable that's going to keep track of our number of quarters. So we define a parameter over here that anyone who calls this method has to provide in this number of quarters. And this number of quarters argument that's going to be passed is what we're going to use to set the size of the total quarterly sales array. So we can use it number of quarters. All right, so now we have that array. But over here, I was saying that if we find, for example, the total of that particular quarter, we can use the quarter index on the total quarterly sales array, right? On the total quarterly sales array, use the quarter index on that, right? And then store the total sales, the total quarterly sales that we just calculated for that particular quarter, terminated, right? And then we can actually even print it. We can print it out, that particular value.